Another benefit of vSphere and virtualization as a whole is the ability to clone your virtual machines to new virtual machines. So let's explore how we do that in vSphere. As you may well be aware, when you take an image of a Windows computer, you generally want to use the sysprep tool to make sure that any unique identifiers in the computer are removed and prepare it for deployment onto another computer. Generally speaking, you won't use an imaging tool to take an image of a PC and just blow it onto another computer, because then you can have the security identifiers and things duplicated, and that could cause you a few problems. And it also means when you deploy the image onto a new computer, the out-of-box experience wizard appears and asks you for things like the host name and the computer name and that kind of thing. It's the same when you clone a Windows VM in vSphere or any other virtualization environment. However, vSphere manages that process for you. So before we clone this virtual machine, we need to create the sysprep configuration. So to do that, we go to Menu, Policies and Profiles. And we have this VM Customization Specifications. So this is what is used to configure sysprep when we clone that virtual machine. So I'm going to say New. I'm just going to call this Standard. Which vCentre server, if we have multiple vCentre servers, which we don't. Target OS, we have Windows, but you can also use this for Linux as well. You can specify a custom sysprep answer file if you wish, if you perhaps have a standard sysprep process and you want to use that. And generate a new security identity, you're going to want to leave that ticked in most cases. Owner name is just the usual information you would put into a new Windows computer. And then the computer name. So we're going to use virtual machine name. You've got multiple options here, of course. So we can say we want to enter a name during the wizard. We can specify a name that we're going to use each time now, and we can tell it to add a unique number. So we can just say VM 10, and then it'll add a number on the end. I usually select use the virtual machine name, because when we clone or deploy a virtual machine using this, by default we are going to need to specify a virtual machine name. And to me, it does make sense that that virtual machine name is the same as the host name. It makes it a lot easier to identify things in the vSphere client. Product key, if you have a Windows license key, of course you're going to want to apply that there. We're not going to be using this for Windows Server, so I'm going to untick that. Specify the administrator password that you want to set on the cloned virtual machine. You can also set it to automatically log on as administrator. That might be handy if you are using some system management software like Config Manager in Windows or something like that, and after the operating system has been deployed, it's going to run some scripts on first logon or something like that. I'm going to leave that unticked for this demonstration. Choose the time zone. I am, of course, in the United Kingdom, so we'll specify that one. We can specify some commands to run first login, so this goes hand in hand with that automatically log on option here. So again, you could put some scripts in here to go and install agents or whatever you need to do on the first boot. Network. So we can use default settings for the guest operating system, which will probably be DHCP or network interfaces, or we can specify some network settings. So I'm going to specify some. I'm going to prompt the user for an IP address when the specification is used, and this allows us to pre-fill in the subnet mask, default gateway, and then alternative gateway. IPv6, I'm not going to use that. DNS, we use my gateway again, and wins I am not deploying. So that's now set for prompt user. If you had an Active Directory domain, you can also include that join process in this wizard. Of course, one of the issues with that is you're going to be saving your Active Directory username and password into this wizard. Best practice would probably be to create a dedicated Active Directory account for that purpose with very specific permissions. So it can just join the virtual machine to the domain and nothing else. You probably don't want to put full domain admin credentials in here if you can help it, because they will be stored on the vCentre server. We'll change that back to workgroup though, because I haven't got a domain controller. And we'll say finish. And there we've got our customization specification. So when I go back to my VMs and templates view, I can right click on the virtual machine and say clone to virtual machine. So in this instance, I am cloning it directly from this running virtual machine to another virtual machine. We'll look at creating a template next, but for now, let's just do this VM to VM clone. So this is Windows 10-2. I'll place it in my data center object. Now I still have DRS enabled on this in fully automated mode, so DRS will decide where to place the virtual machine when we power it on. So I just need to select the cluster itself, HA1. Storage, I'm going to put this on NFS DS2. When we clone it, we can either keep the settings of the original VM, which is what I'm going to do, or we can change them. Now, you notice I can't change that to thick provision. That's because we're using an NFS data store. You'll remember from the storage module, NFS data stores do not support thick provisioned VMs. But if I was using a normal data store there, I could change that to thick provision. We can also say configure per disk. So if you've got an operating system disk and a data disk and you want them to be on separate data stores, you can slide that across and put them on different data stores. However, for this, I'm just going to leave it on the main wizard and select data store 2 to put it all on 1. I want to customize the operating system. If you do not tick that, sysprep will not run in the cloned virtual machine. And that's where you could have this issue with potentially duplicate security identifiers on your virtual machines. Customize the virtual machine's hardware. If you want to add more RAM or take away CPUs or something like that, you can take that, but I'm not going to on this occasion. And I am going to power on the virtual machine after creation. So without that, it'll just create the virtual machine, won't actually turn it on. So I'm going to select standard as my template. I have options there. If I wish, I can override some of the settings if I need to tweak it on a one-off basis. And once I've progressed forward, it now asks me for that IP address. So this is because in that customization specification, I said I wanted it to prompt me for the IP addresses. So I'm going to say 192.168.42.111. There we go. And you'll see, of course, these have already been carried forward for me from the wizard. And we'll say finish. So that is now going to clone the virtual machine. When it does, when that task completes, it will start the virtual machine. And when the virtual machine starts, that is when the sysprep process will run within Windows 10 to reconfigure the virtual machine, including clearing out those important security identifiers, but also setting the IP addresses, doing any domain joins or anything else that we did with the customization specification that we created. And there we go. Our second Windows 10 VM has been created by cloning the original virtual machine. And we can see in the vCentre here, the IP address has been set as per the settings that I entered into the guest customization wizard when I ran the clone. So to recap, when that task runs, all it does is clones the virtual machine and, if configured, powers it on. The task may show completed, but sysprep hasn't run yet. The guest VM needs to be started if it wasn't at the end of the clone process because you didn't tick that box. And when it starts, the sysprep process needs to run, which may take 10 minutes or so. If the sysprep process doesn't run, it's usually something in the guest operating system. In the guest operating system, go and look in C, Windows, System32, sysprep, and you'll find a folder in there called Panther, which contains the sysprep log files. And you'll be able to see from there why sysprep did not run. I actually had this whilst trying to record this demonstration. My Windows 10 VM wouldn't clone. I went and looked in that log file and it was plainly as day. Up at the top of the log file, it was tripping over a package that relates to the United Kingdom language pack and regional pack. Quick look online and found that this is a known issue within Windows 10, where the language pack is installed per user instead of system-wide, and that upsets sysprep. It's a known issue, if I recall correctly, since Windows 10 1803 build. So if sysprep doesn't run, your first protocol is to look at the VM you've just cloned at its log files to see if it tried to run sysprep and what actually failed. It's probably not a vSphere issue if you configured all of the steps correctly in the wizard.